If you listen carefully, no, that's not carnival music in the background. That's the Coaching Carousel getting fired up.
You are Locked On Wolfpack, your daily podcast on the NC State Wolfpack, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Wolfpack Nation? It's time to get locked in with Locked On. Thanks for making Locked On Wolfpack your first listen each and every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Our Tuesday opening sponsor is Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase, especially if you're now in the market for NC State football bowl ticket. Happy Tuesday to all. As always, I'm Grayson Boone, joined by former Wolfpack defensive tackle Kenton Gibbs. Kenton, now that the regular season has come and gone, it doesn't take long at all for the rest of the college football world to keep spinning, and maybe in some senses, spin just a little bit faster. We've seen some players enter the transfer portal, or at least announce that they will be entering the transfer portal when that opens next week. We'll get more into that in just a second. But also, this is pretty much the main week for the coaching carousel. And we're going to start here talking about defensive coordinator Tony Gibson. He was immediately linked to a couple of schools here in just one calendar day. We do know that he has interviewed for the Charlotte head coaching job and is being considered a finalist. I've also seen him linked to App State. I've seen West Virginia, although that one doesn't really feel as likely to me. And I've also seen Marshall in the mix. But if you were to ask me, I would think probably Charlotte and App State are the two most likely, I guess, threats to NC State at this point in the cycle. But I have a take. I do actually think this will be the offseason that we end up losing Tony Gibson.
I mean, that's very possible. At the end of the day, most coaches strive to be, head coaches if you're a coordinator and all that good stuff. And it's a bigger check. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, career advancement is obviously a big thing, but let's just be very honest with ourselves. Like, everybody's going to look at the check and say, oh, well, you're already making plenty of money. Listen, this is America, babes. If you can make more, you go do it, right? So, that's not a thing that I'd be super, super shocked about or disappointed in. He's been a fantastic defensive coordinator with us for quite some time. So hard be it for me to say like, oh, he left us so early or he left us in the lurch or anything along those lines. I think I look at this situation and I say to myself, like, hey, if Tony Gibson gets a head coaching job, he gets a head coaching job elsewhere, and I'd wish him nothing but the best. I hope that everything works out well for him. I'd love to have him back in Raleigh, but even if he's not, I'm going to root for him wherever he goes.
He has been nothing short of excellent during his tenure here at NC State, and we're always going to remember the defenses that had Drake Thomas and Peyton Wilson and Isaiah Moore and some of the defensive backs, like, with the likes of Aiden White and Tyler Baker-Williams and Tanner Ingle. We've had some really solid defenders here over the course of the last 4 or 5 years, and Tony Gibson has been the maestro behind the scenes, pulling the strings perfectly and getting the most out of these guys. If this is the offseason that we do end up losing him, it will be very bittersweet, but it will also be very well deserved. I do think he's more than worthy of head coaching looks. I think he'd make for an excellent head coach. A lot of the fan base that was sort of wishing that he would stay long enough to be head coach here in Raleigh, but I'm not surprised that his name is being tossed around so quickly. In fact, it was already being tossed around last offseason. I believe he was a finalist for Duke. Thank God that didn't work out, but nonetheless, not surprised to see him pick up a lot of interest in some interviews right out of the gate. However, if NC State is to lose Tony Gibson, Kenton, how quickly do you expect NC State to make a counter move? And what kind of defense do you think they'd look to go to? Maybe stick with the 3-3-5 or go back to a 4-man front?
The 3-3-5 is very unconventional, and it's not too often that you see that. So I'd be surprised. I'd be a little shocked if that is what they were to stick with. With that being said, I mean, at the end of the day, this is not a situation where I'm looking up and saying to myself, like, oh, this 3-3-5 is something that our roster is super well constructed for, and we have to stick with it. If we're being quite honest, we had more good defensive linemen and linebackers this year, so it would have made a lot of sense to potentially get out of that. So, I'm not really too beholden to the 3-3-5, but I'm not really like, oh, we need to sprint away from it at light speed, post haste. We never need to be there. I'm not sure.
Nonetheless, I do think the Tony Gibson situation is one that is going to move pretty quickly, because if you're other schools that are in the market for a head coach, you want to go ahead and get that ball rolling so you can start your portal ventures and NIL, whatever, XYZ. And for NC State, if you are to lose Tony Gibson over the course of the next week or maybe 2 weeks, you got to already have some probably options in mind. I would be shocked if Coach Doran doesn't already have some names in mind, if it does come to that. You got to figure a lot of this goes on behind the scenes over the course of a year. And especially talking about Gibson getting interest last season, Doran probably went through the same thing last season. You had to come up with several different contingency plans if you are to lose Tony Gibson here. But I do think this is a situation that's going to move pretty quickly. Usually the week after the regular season is when you see a lot of the administrative moves, not so much the portal moves, because that'll really kick into high gear next week. But speaking of Coach Doran, I also want to talk about this on here. I've seen him potentially linked to the likes of the Purdue Boilermakers. What do you make of this, Kenton?
Here's the thing, right? I'm literally looking down at my phone because I'm getting live information about what could or could not be going on there. And how do I put this as gently as possible? I've been asked multiple times by my friends and my people who are in Big Ten Nation, because obviously being a Detroiter, I grew up in Big Ten country. I know it well. I know it intimately well. And people are like, hey, what's up with Doran? What's going on? Now, here's the thing that's so interesting about that. The fact that so many people are reaching out to me about this still till now, and I'm like now looking around, reaching my contacts like, hey, what do y'all know? What's going on over there? I feel like there's a good amount of chatter there. But like I said, I'm literally getting information right now. I'm not sure how much actual steam is behind it. If that picks up and changes, I'll be sure to let everybody know. But at the moment, the information I have, it's much more of a kicking the tires than it is like a full. And by the way, the kicking the tires thing is from Purdue to Doran more so than Doran to Purdue at the moment. That's the information I have at the time of recording. That can change any moment. Like I said, I'm not going to lie to y'all and say I've been 100% focused this episode because I've been monitoring some things happening in real time here. And as far as I know, it's folks from that way are like, hey, what's going on? Do you know it? And I'm like, I haven't heard anything, but I'm listening. You know what I mean? My ears to the streets like the pavement want to talk to me. So if I hear something, I'll let you know.
Purdue kicking the tires on Doran, I think that's probably the best way to phrase it at this point in time, because I don't think it would be extremely likely the other way around. We know Doran is very set in his current contract. That's out to 2029. The buyout is pretty extensive, which is the reason that he will still be here in 2025, at least we believe. So I don't see it's very likely that Doran will move on, but I'm not also all that surprised to see schools like Purdue that had a horrid year start to kick the tires on potential replacements. And so I think it's a little bit interesting that he is receiving some interest, and that's not something that's new either. I think Michigan State was in the mix at some point. I know Tennessee way back in the day. How funny would that have been if that actually happened? But regardless here, the coaching staff at NC State picking up interest from other schools, it makes us all nervous because of the roster continuity, but it is a good thing. When other schools are looking at your coaching staff and thinking about what pieces they can take to make their staff better, that's a compliment. That means that they're seeing NC State doing things correctly. They want a piece of the NC State culture that we talk so much about. So the coaching carousel is certainly hot. We didn't even talk about Robert and I guess we'll keep our eyes peeled for that situation as well. But I would expect at least a couple administrative changes for NC State over the course of the next couple of weeks, because this is when you're going to see it. They want to kind of have all the chairs set before the portal really gets going. Not to mention National Signing Day is Wednesday. It's tomorrow. So that's another key piece of the puzzle. The carousel is just now starting to pick up steam. Tony Gibson looks to be maybe getting on it. Certainly something to keep your eyes peeled for over the course of this week and into next. And on that same note, now we're going to dive into the transfer portal players so far for NC State. This comes after a quick word from our sponsors. Our first Tuesday sponsor is Gametime. Gametime has a new feature called Gametime Picks, and it makes getting tickets to all of your favorite live events easier than ever before. Gametime Picks filters out all of the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, and you won't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. The curation of Game Time picks makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, you name it, they got it. Toggling the all-in pricing feature on the app will show your total upfront, so you receive zero surprises at checkout. And as always, you get that panoramic view of your seat in the app before you buy, so you know exactly what to expect upon arrival. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply, and again, create an account and use redeem code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, Locked On College, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? You already know. It's game time. Middle portion of our Tuesday show, sticking on the same topic of the world revolving around us in college football land, the transfer portal. Now, we talked on Monday about Casey Concepcion announcing his intent to enter the portal, but on Monday, NC State had 3 more players enter their names, 2 linebackers, 1 defensive end. The linebackers are Jalen Parker and Wyatt Wright. The defensive end is DJ Jackson. And also keep in mind, Red Hibbler, who left the team way back in September, he has also announced his intent to enter the portal. So 5 in total. Of course, this number is surely to grow. Kenton, we'll start here with your thoughts on the linebackers, Jalen Parker and Wyatt Wright. Are you surprised to see them enter or not so much?
Honestly,
that's a bad question.
No. It's not a bad question. I'm a little surprised that these guys are entering in terms of the linebackers. But with that being said, of all of our units this year, Grayson, both sides of the ball, which would you say was the biggest liability?
I think far and away it was the linebackers.
I wish you all the best. Maybe the 3-3-5 was not the system for you. Maybe there's something else out there for you. More power to you. Go find it. Go be great in it. But it was shown at multiple points, multiple times this year. The linebacker play simply was not good, especially after Cade Ford went down.
Yeah.
Oh, there was a dip in a way that, with all due respect to the players that were still playing linebacker, that are still playing linebacker, rather, hey, again, I wish you all the best. I hope that you all find a system, find a setup, find everything that is working perfectly for your good, for success. I personally look at this and I'm like, that's tough. Or not that tough. I look at this personally, I say, hey, more power to you. Best of luck.
I'll start by saying I'm not at all surprised, not about the players individually, but just the fact that there's going to be a lot of turnover in that linebacker room, because to Kenton's point, which I vehemently agree with, the linebackers on the team this year were probably the weakest single point. And that kind of speaks to our concerns coming into the season. That was the number one position group that we had circled on our list. We had a lot of questions about what they're going to be able to do, trying to basically backfill the void left by Peyton Wilson. We figured that there was going to be drop-off. We hoped it wouldn't be as bad as it actually was. And also keep in mind, yes, you do lose Caden Fordham, who was supposed to be your Mike linebacker. That's a tough pill to swallow, especially right in the middle of the season. Never really recovered. I mean, it's definitely hard for a team to recover, but NC State has found a way to deal with those types of injuries a couple of years ago when you lost Isaiah Moore, you lost Peyton Wilson, and you really only had Drake Thomas to carry the workload, and he found a way to do it. But that spoke to the ability of Tony Gibson. This year, much different story. We talked about run fits. It felt like all 12 games of the season because it was just so inconsistently bad. When you're looking, I guess, big picture about the portal needs, linebacker might be sitting atop of my list for the number one priority as far as position groups go. You're going to need to be aggressive, and I mean aggressive, in the portal trying to get some linebacking play. I know Kamal Bonner, if he does return, that kid's got to be a starter heading into next year. I was very impressed with what I saw out of him to close the year. Yeah. Elijah Groves, I'm just going to keep saying this. I'm hoping to speak it into existence. If he can give you something in 2025, I think that'd be a massive boost. Sean Brown is an interesting situation because do you move him back to safety? Do you keep him at linebacker? I don't think we have the answer to that question yet, but I'm not at all surprised to see guys that didn't contribute much as linebackers decide to look for greener grass, because I do think in both of their cases, there will be greener grass somewhere else for them, with all due respect. And I
Right.
think that also leads me into DJ Jackson on the defensive line. This was probably the biggest of the surprises so far, because KC was not at all a surprise. DJ Jackson had moments kind of late in the year where he came up and made a couple pretty decent plays behind Brandon Cleveland. You're like, okay, who is this kid? Can he give us something next year and beyond? And can't exactly blame him for wanting to look for his own greener pasture. So DJ Jackson will be hitting the portal as well. Kenta, what are your thoughts there about the defensive line?
The defensive line needs depth. They need depth, and I know that the Colorado transfer was a senior, correct?
Chaz Wallace, I believe he was, yes.
Yeah, so you're losing him. You're losing Jackson. Cleveland's coming back, but you need depth. You need more pieces up front. Potter's leaving as well. I believe he's out of eligibility. Devin Van is leaving as well. You need pieces on that defensive line, and every loss is magnified a bit because, again, Devin Van has been otherworldly at times this year. And so to lose him, to lose Potter, who I think sneakily had a very good year. I think Noah Potter,
I would agree,
under the radar, had a very good year. You're pretty much losing everybody except Brandon Cleveland. I'm sitting here saying to myself, man, is Shirley coming back next year?
You do have Shirley back, and you also have Travali Price back, assuming that both of them return.
Okay. Yeah. So you have both of those guys back, which puts you in plus territory, because I think both of those guys were good this year in kind of backup roles and all that. And by backup, I literally mean like second man up type, not like a reserve type of role. They were both good in their roles, but with an expanded role, you're asked to take on expanded responsibilities. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But we need more depth. Having one group of guys that's good is not good enough in today's college football, especially on the defensive line, where those are the biggest guys that are asked to run everywhere. Defensive linemen are always supposed to be running to the ball. If you're worth your weight in salt, that's the minimum for being a defensive lineman. So, we need more. Obviously, this loss hurts, but we'll see how this thing plays out going forward.
Yeah, just taking a quick look here at the depth of the defensive line heading into next season, we do have a lot of young freshmen, in fact. Joshua Alexander-Felton, freshman. Chase Bond, freshman. Justin Terrell, freshman. Hopefully you can maybe get one of those three guys to contribute on some level, but if you don't, that's another big portal group to be circling here is the defensive line. Linebacking and the defensive line is probably 1 and 2 for me in terms of position group priority. Number 3 would be offensive line, but we'll save that for another day. The defense is going to need to be completely reworked. And I guess especially in a sense, if you do lose Tony Gibson, but even if you don't, you're going to have to be very, very aggressive to pick up some key pieces defensively.
Yeah, I think that the secondary is the only place where I'm comfortable not getting a ton, not going very heavily into, because Cisse he was our best DB for a lot of the season. And Jackson Vick looked phenomenal. He looked phenomenal down the stretch. Cooley and company look good. There are lots of guys in that secondary that stepped up, made big plays when they need to be made, all that type of stuff. I'm very interested to see how this thing plays out. I know we're getting Boykin back as well. Next year, he'll be, back healthy, having a full year under his belt to, get healthy and do all the things. So I'm very interested to see how that plays out. I'm very interested to see what kind of happens there. And so, with that in mind, I'm very intrigued to see what this front seven looks like after we're done in the portal, because again, I'd be utterly shocked and surprised if we did not pick up some instant impact pieces in that group.
Yeah, and to that point on the secondary, when you're looking at guys that can return to NC State, you have Devon Boykin, you have Jackson Vick, you have Devon Marshall, Isaiah Crowell, Tamarcus Cooley, Brandon Cisse. These are all guys that made impacts this year, and they can all return on top of some of the other freshmen you have, like Assad Brown or Javon Bali. The secondary feels pretty good, in my opinion. Now, I'd certainly expect maybe an addition or two or maybe a couple, but the secondary looks to be a strong point in terms of what you do need to go get or what you feel good with in-house. But yeah, just to reiterate, linebacking core and defensive line, I think you're going to see probably a lot of turnover in terms of guys entering the portal, but the days are very early here. You're going to see a lot more names, but this is just your reminder. This is how it goes. Don't sound the alarm when you see another guy hit the portal on Tuesday or Wednesday or whenever. This is just how it goes. For NC State, prioritize your best players and then go get other ones that can supplement what you hope to keep. That's the most important part. So the transfer portal is not even yet open, but it's about to get very active here in about a week's time. To round out our Tuesday show, we're going to look back at the keys we had in place to close out the season before our first bye. We're going to take a look at this after a quick word from our sponsors. Second Tuesday sponsor is FanDuel. Tackle the NFL action all season long on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet just $5, and you can get $150 back in bonus bets if that first $5 bet wins. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL, all in just one singular place. When you get a hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the very same page that you place all of your bets. Head on over to FanDuel.com in order to join today. You'll get started with that $150 back in bonus bets if that first pesky $5 bet wins. That's FanDuel.com in order to get started. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Last couple minutes of our Tuesday show. Walk it back about a calendar month now. We had a Friday show where we gave you Kenton's keys for the remainder of the season, which was the last 4 games of the year. We did this during our bye week after we had beaten Cal and before we had played Stanford. We gave you 3 offensive keys and 3 defensive keys for things that we needed to see for the rest of the season. We'll start here on offense. The first key was for CJ Bailey to average at least a QBR of 60 plus. I went back and crunched the numbers. 63.4. So he did actually achieve this. CJ was up and down. He had a great Stanford game, a not so great Duke game, I guess somewhere in the middle Georgia Tech game because he had 3 picks, but he ran for 3 touchdowns. And then I thought he played extremely well in the second half against the Dirty Foot Club. CJ played relatively well enough for you to win at least 3 of those last 4 games, and we should have because we gave away the Georgia Tech game. CJ's development over the course of the season was a joy to watch, and it really just gets that hope kind of sparked when you're talking about 2025.
Yeah, I'm very confused by people who are saying, oh, we need to go get a portal quarterback for him to compete with and all that. Have we not had enough of that? Have we? You keep running your head into these brick walls, right? And you're just like, oh, there's another brick wall. Let's run our head into it again. You have the homegrown talent. You have the guy. Make no bones about it. CJ Bailey is the guy. And I know there are going to be people who look at me and say, oh, you said that MJ Morris was the guy. If MJ Morris stays, we're looking at a very different situation. And I mean that from a very genuine standpoint. You talk about him struggling at Maryland, that's fine and dandy. But the reality is when you decide to enter that portal, you're going into a system that you do not know.
Yep.
Especially as a college quarterback where you may not have seen the terminology and different things that they run. Yeah, I'm sure that's plenty fun. That's why all those great quarterbacks play so well in their first years at new schools. Now, back to CJ. His performance, like you said, it was up and down, but it wasn't just about him. The pieces around him were also up and down. We saw games where the pieces around him played excellently, performed extremely well, and we saw games where they just didn't. And so with that in mind, how many drops did we see? And I think we would both agree that Duke and Georgia Tech were by far his worst game. How many drops did we see in that Duke game? How many times?
I think there's at least 5.
How many times did we see balls where it's like, help your freshman out and make this catch that weren't even difficult? Hey, this is only guys playing on Sunday catch this ball type of catch. So objectively speaking, when I look at CJ's performance down the stretch, he got better. He improved. That's all you can really ask for. And I think he did well enough.
Yeah, I do think it's the right idea that you want CJ to be the guy throughout the offseason. I certainly think he has a ton of things to improve on, holding the ball for too long, getting through your progressions, making the right reads at the right time. all of that is definitely still a work in progress. But
Absolutely.
when you're looking over the course of all the true freshman quarterbacks that played in the entire country, CJ Bailey sits very much atop of that list for the most impressive of all of those guys this year. All things considered, CJ played very well. He gave you enough offensively that you should have won more games than just 6. And there was bigger factors at play, but I was overall impressed and very proud with the way CJ Bailey played for us. The second offensive key was the running back room to combine for a minimum of 500 total yards and 6 total touchdowns. Went back and crunched the numbers. They combined for 711 total yards and 7 touchdowns. Got that accomplished. Hollywood Smothers nearly accomplished it by himself. That's how good he was in the last 4 games of the season. And the last offensive key was no more than 4 turnovers. Did not accomplish that one. We had 7. CJ Bailey kind of struggled there in that Georgia Tech game. Also had a couple fumbles in the mix. True freshman quarterback, you take the good with the bad, but 2 out of 3 for the offense.
Yeah, we talked about how the running game picked up. No surprise there. And those turnovers plagued us all season.
Yeah.
You know, there was a reason. The keys aren't made the keys because it's things you could easily achieve or things that are impossible to achieve. These are things that are paramount to your success. The games that we lost, Georgia Tech and Duke, did we not combine for, what was it, 5 or 6 in those 2 games? I wonder what could have been the determiner of those 2 games.
Yeah. And then defensively, our first defensive key for the rest of the season was to allow less than 3 explosive plays per game. Did not accomplish that one. In fact, I don't know if we accomplished it in any of the 4 games. Stanford had explosives. Duke had explosive. Georgia Tech didn't really have that many explosive. Maybe you get it on that one. But Omarion Hampton by himself had explosive in the last game. Did not accomplish the first defensive key. The second defensive key was to not allow 30-plus points in any of the games. They went 28, 29, and then 30 twice. Technically speaking, you got this key, but you pushed twice because you allowed 30 on the nose. So we're going to count it because you kept them technically under that 30 number, but again, probably should have held some of these teams to a lot less than that. And the last key was actually a special teams key. It was for Kanoa Vineset to hit on at least 80% of his field goals in the last 4 games. Wouldn't you know it, he was 8 of 10. Well, actually, combined with Colin Smith. I think that should count because they shared duties. They were a combined 8 of 10, which is exactly 80%. So you get 2 of 3 on the offense, 2 of 3 for defense of special teams, 4 out of 6 for the rest of the year keys, and they finish with a record of 6-6. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it makes sense. And mind you, we're looking at going 4 of 6 against the keys, but some of the most important ones were the ones that you missed. You know what I mean? Like, if you take care of the ball better, how different does this outcome look going down the stretch?
Very likely 4-0.
If you take care of the ball against Duke, what does that look like? If you take care of the ball against Georgia Tech, what does that look like? And then the explosives, don't get me started. Don't get me started. Not a single team just slowly plotted and marched and just, hey, we're going to grind it out in 4, 5, 6 yards, and we'll turn it into 8, and then we'll turn it into 10, and we'll go back to just punching and grinding away. Nobody did that. They beat you by going over the top. They beat you by you being misaligned or misassigned, missing a gap, because I went back and looked at Omarion Hampton's long touchdown. That would have counted a 2-hand touch. And I'm not going to say any names, but it seems to be the same guy going unblocked a lot and just kind of making you wonder, hey, buddy, where are you going? The ball's over here. So, you know, I mean, at the end of the day, you saw some of the ugly things rear their head, but those are the 2 biggest of the group. Turnovers, explosive plays. Make them beat you and do it right every time, which explosive plays take away, because what should be a 6, 7, 8, 9 play drive turns into a 1 because you can't tackle, or you don't know what gap you're supposed to be in. Turnovers, you give teams really short fields. How many short fields were teams given because of what we saw? And that's not even including the safety against Duke, which added points to their total. So, you know, it is what it is.
Yeah, and I want to give Kenton a ton of credit for some of these keys. We all know that Kenton's an extreme ball knower anyway, but you look at those 2 keys that we missed, just like he was discussing here, the turnovers. If you kept it under 4 and we had 7 in total, just think about how differently the Georgia Tech game looks if we don't throw a pick six or you don't throw 3 interceptions in total. I almost guarantee you that you win that game. Or if you don't get CJ Bailey tackled in the end zone for a safety on an RPO from the 1-yard line, what are we even doing? Or fumble, you probably would have had a really good shot at beating Duke as well. So not only did Kenton give you 6 keys that made a ton of sense, but you saw exactly where you would have hit all 6 and finished 4-0. So they were on the money. They always are, Kenton, but hats off to you for this entire season, putting Kenton's keys together, the Locked On Look of the Week together. We might have one of those for you on Wednesday. Just a bittersweet end to another football season for NC State. They're 6-6. We saw a lot of things that went right, a lot of things that went wrong, and there's a lot of things to be cleaned up when you're looking forward to 2025. But that was our end of the year key review for you here on Tuesday. That'll do it for us here on Tuesday. Be sure to hit that like button. Drop your comments in the comment box. Tell us what you think about the prospects of Tony Gibson taking another job. Well-deserved, but would be sad nonetheless. Tell us what you think about the prospects of Purdue possibly kicking the tires on head coach Dave Doran. Tell us what you think about the transfer portal players from NC State that have already announced, possibly some names that you think may be announced over the course of the next couple weeks. Anything else you have on your mind, drop that in the box as well. And we'll see you right back here tomorrow on Wednesday for more. Until then, go Pack.
Go Pack.